All right, for more, let's bring in Center of the American Experiment policy fellow Bill Glahn, who has been tracking this story for years. Bill, I'm really glad to have you on the show. I follow your work and I appreciate it. You know what's going on in Minnesota. I'm really curious to hear what you think about the timing of Governor Walz deciding not to run for re-election, and the fact, I'm reportedly, that he kind of discussed the matter with Amy Klobuchar before he made his final announcement. What do you make of all that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting now that the word is out, now that he's made his announcement, we're hearing that this has been some months in the making. And I'm speculating that he had lost the confidence, not just a bit of sort of voters, but also of the big dollar donors that back the Democratic Party. And the decision was made to push him aside for another candidate. And Amy Klobuchar was either tasked with delivering that message, or she herself would like to step into the race and run for governor in her own right.
You know, we are hearing, as we just heard in Mike Tobin's report, that, you know, Governor Walz is still being summoned to Congress to appear to talk about how this fraud got so bad under his watch. I mean, it goes back, I think the reporting suggests, and you tell me if this is correct, to 2018. You know, Representative James Cober said this, that Walz can decide he's not going to run for governor again, but he can't run from accountability. Is that what Governor Walz is doing by saying he's not going to run again, try to evade accountability here?
I think so, in part. You know, if he were running this year, if he had his name on the ballot in November, he would have to answer to voters and hopefully the media as to how he's conducted himself over these last two terms. And we really haven't ever gotten to the bottom of how the fraud got to be so bad. You know, it does go back almost a decade to that child care scandal, but that was in the mere millions of dollars. Since then, we've found, the U.S. Attorney has found, Medicaid program fraud in the billions of dollars. So how did we end up adding all these extra zeros under Tim Walz's watch? And that's the fear, and I'm glad to hear Representative Comer is pushing ahead with his oversight hearings, because my fear is if we never figure out how we got to the billions from the millions, we're just going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over.
You know, and we talk about Tim Walz, and rightfully so, he's the governor of the state, but you got some other folks in Minnesota who are very much at the center of all this. I think of Attorney General Keith Ellison, who obviously has had contact with the folks who are very near the center of what was going on with the fraud. Bill, do you ever think we're gonna get some answers from a guy like Keith Ellison? Is he gonna end up testifying before this committee in Congress? What do you make of his potential role and what he's been doing lately?
Well, I don't know if it's to his credit, but Attorney General Ellison did appear in front of a State House committee, the State House Anti-Fraud and State Agency Oversight Committee. So he has taken it upon himself to show up to a committee. He was there for an hour and a half, answered questions or didn't answer questions, as the case may be. He spent most of it filibustering. So I would be mildly surprised if he didn't show up to Washington. He thinks he's got an answer to these questions. I don't agree with them, but he's next up. If Tim Walz can't find a way to run for re-election in the current anti-fraud environment, I don't see how the chief legal officer of the state, asleep at the switch also these last 7 years, could have a viable campaign.
And then, you know, moving forward, there's the question of how to make sure this doesn't happen again. I mean, to the Trump administration's credit, they're really taking it head on. They're freezing funding. They're demanding answers from state administrators, asking them to show documentation about how more federal funding is being spent in real time, you know, and saying we're going to freeze these funds until you can answer our questions. But beyond that, what needs to change? There's been some reporting that, you know, there were whistleblowers for years trying to get some attention on the spending in Minnesota, and nothing changed. So what needs to change now?
Well, two things: personnel's policy, and second of all, attitude. And the attitude also works down into the lower levels of the bureaucracy. For far too long, Minnesota state government has been run on the honor system, that if you file an application, you send an invoice, we just trust that you're on the up and up, and few questions, if any, ever get asked. And that's how we lost $9 billion. So I'm hoping the attitude changes to one of oversight and compliance, that when somebody sends an application, somebody does the legwork to make sure it's all on the up and up. And then we need new people at the top. That we've had the same folks in charge for the last 7 years. They haven't gotten the job done. We need a wholesale turnover.
Well, we will see if Minnesota voters will arouse themselves and do something about it, Bill, or not. That will be the story to watch. Bill Glahn, thanks for being with us today.